So welcome to Hyphenate, working between art, craft, and design. That gives you a sense of what hopefully we'll be covering and the range of topics on how each of these practitioners really engage in practice that combines the three. So again, we're talking kind of in between art, design, and craft tonight. We'll chat, and then at the very end, we'd like to open it up for questions. So keep those in mind as we're talking, if anything comes up. As panelist Tiersa Nureyev has said, creatives often split their time toggling between multiple vocational roles, that of maker, designer, artist, or educator. I believe all of us here have toggled in all of those spaces, not least of all the panelists here. Tiersa's project, the Lineal project, which Pete, thank you for outlining a bit, is an attempt by Tiersa to distill and present these creative threads as a single, multifaceted statement. And it's this residency and project, again, thanks in part to SFArtsED that gave impetus to this panel. I want to also thank Minnesota Street Project, Lindsay, Albert, and Michael, who are always running around in the background here at Minnesota Street Project. So as Pete said, I'm a freelance curator and cultural producer. I work with the design division at California College of the Arts and also with Foresight Foundation, which just launched an exhibition titled Land's End at the former Cliff House here in San Francisco, inviting 27 artists from 14 different countries to present work addressing climate change. In addition to that, I've had the privilege of working with independent artists and designers, supporting them in a multitude of capacities, specifically around writing, proposal development, that kind of thing. And I've worked with all three of these individuals in different capacities, which is very exciting to me. So everyone on this panel is making objects with their hands. They're engaged in materials-driven practices, and they're employing skills with rigor. I would describe them all as artists. I would describe them all as designers. And I would describe them all as multi-hyphenate. So let's turn as a starting point to a multi-hyphenate individual, British curator, artist, and teacher Richard Wentworth, who has written this. In the right context, there is one phrase we English like to reach for: as long as a piece of string. This repartee in any subject is suspended somewhere between the unreadable and the unanswerable. So rather than talking about marketplace and valuation, I'd like to start to hover in this unreadable, unanswerable sort of nether region here. We talked together as a group in anticipation of this panel about how prehistoric artists carved figurines and made beads and made cave paintings, sophisticated work. And to a certain extent, we're still here. The tools have changed, the tooling has changed, emerging materials have evolved, certainly. But after having connected, we talked about the human impulse to ask questions about the world around us in an attempt to make meaning. We talked about engaging the use of our hands, and in some cases our bodies, in transforming materials into objects, into environments. And we talked about how artists, designers, craft people are utilizing tools and tooling to make objects and environments as a means of solving problems and addressing needs. How else, panelists, might you define the distinctions between art and craft and design? And I'll add to that, is there a distinction based on your own practices? Do you view there being a distinction at all? I hadn't picked on anyone, so if anyone wants to jump in, I don't know. You're gonna have to battle it out here.
Well, maybe I can. Sorry.
Helio's gonna pick up a microphone and tell us some of his thoughts on this.
So I like when I'm making work, I don't think about category. Like I have something in front of me, I want to respond to it, I'm hoping I get deep satisfaction at whatever I'm doing, and then I draw upon whatever skill set I have, whether it's, like thinking, or whether it's sort of craft, which I love engaging in, just because it's so satisfying to use my hands and kind of think about the traditions and history and using that skill set. And if I need to, I can always have that, like just to propel me forward. But it often gets sidetracked in my musings, and maybe I start thinking in a sort of artistic way, but maybe not. It just sort of for me, it's a very organic process. And sometimes maybe I incorporate a little bit of design, thinking as a designer who's kind of maybe a little bit of strategizing about what's going on, maybe in a big picture sort of way, but really it's kind of bump into it and kind of go as it makes sense to me, sort of the sensations and the tactility of what's happening. But I tend to not overlay things so heavily on myself, especially in the process of making. So I don't let those things hover so heavily over myself as I'm sort of, in the process of making.
Thank you. And Yvonne, I see you nodding your head. Oh, do you make a distinction between art, craft, and design in practice, or do you?
No.
At all? Just no. Short answer.
I think I would agree that I don't think about it when I'm in the practice of making things. And I think at the highest level, art, design, craft, they're all about the same thing. It's about creation. And I think in the base, I think I first consider myself an artist, and that sort of catches everything. And then there's layers of process and technicality or technique, I think, that you can sort of place into those other categories. And I think that there's part of us that wants to simplify it and think about, to frame it. But I think that when you're making things, there are motivations coming from different points, and I might start with something that's more conceptually driven, and maybe I would consider that more idea and more art. Or if I'm trying to solve a functional problem, I'm thinking about it more from the engineering of something, and maybe that feels more design. But I think that they're present in every project. There are layers of those that are always there.
Do you want to speak to that?
I feel like I'm gonna. Can you hear in the back? No. Okay. Can you hear me? All right, there we go. I feel like I'm gonna a little bit repeat what you said, because prior to this conversation, we were talking about first there's just the impulse to make. Like that's like the bottom line. I grew up with a mother who was a seamstress, but who could make anything. She could fix your tent, she could make your wedding dress, she could do anything with thread and needle and a sewing machine. And she was raised by a woman who was also a seamstress. So I think my first impetus and impulse was just the kind of fascination around transforming a 2D object, in this case fabric, because that's really what I started with, into something 3D. And there's just sort of a magic and alchemy that comes, and also this sense of it was this, now I made it this, and it's kind of thrilling. And I think that that's really the impetus for everything. I think the categories are a layer that I've had to apply because I have to make money, really. And I have to figure out who I'm marketing it to and who's going to be interested. So that's a secondary thing, but it's also always really front and center because, you have to survive. So, yeah.
So stripping and making it about the non-monetary factors that contribute to your work, on a more deeply personal level, how do you value your work and your process? Not sure why the microphone is acting up, but it seems to be. How do you value your work as it's translated into objects? How do you decide what to do in a non-monetary sense?
in a deeply personal, creative sense. What drives you? I can say something. What drives me really is getting that feeling of excitement and enchantment with something. Like, it's kind of wanting to feel like there's something bigger, or like that you're tapping into something deeper in yourself. And I think that that's at the root of why I'm an artist or a maker, is just wanting to get that feeling of being excited and tapped in.
I would say that there are many motivations, and at a certain point, once you start making things, it doesn't matter how you started. I mean, I guess I would think back when I just was drawing as a kid, and then I wanted to make things that were three-dimensional, and then the nature of that changed to being more functional. And I think that every time you make something, you open up like a dozen more veins to explore about the way that materials can go together, or the concepts that you can investigate. And so I think that there's the mental level, the idea, and then there's the material. A lot for me, I just want to, like, I see something and I just want to play with that material. And then there's a long process of experimentation that maybe doesn't go anywhere, but maybe there's a dozen things in there that I will return to at some point. And I think that there's just, once you start making, there's inertia, and it snowballs, and it just goes and goes and goes. And it's just this endless curiosity and sense of adventure, I think, in making.
So Yvonne, you make furniture objects. You've been making a series of furniture objects that you've found a fabricator for, but that you've designed, built, fabricated from scratch initially. At Helio, for 20 years, you've been developing a series of graphite objects, and a wide range of them, different scales. Tiersa, you've been doing costuming for stage, for film, for years now. Can you each talk about, maybe not the production part of it, that has become familiar, but a project that to you deeply represents this value that you're talking about, the excitement, the joy of making that you're working on right now?
Well, I think what I really enjoy about art is that it's giving me permission to do something that would otherwise be called sort of crazy. Like I love...
Tell.
Well, you know, I love my fishing. I love my, music listening, and I just get so much enjoyment, and there's something kind of bursting in my, I'm not so great with words, but I'm just gonna say soul. But I really feel like when I'm fishing, or listening to really good music, there's something really fulfilling in me that I can't quite bring to language or words. And I get the same thing from making things. And there's a certain kind of making that I do or when I'm making something that seems to be much bigger than all of this stuff. Like if I just add up all the stuff together that I'm doing, like I'm working in graphite, if I'm working in wood or whatever, if I add all those stuff up, like 1 plus 1, it equals 2, but in this case it's like 1 plus 1 equals like 8. And I'm not sure how that transition happens, but like when I'm working, making art, that kind of thing happens. I think maybe it's that enchantment that you were talking about, that there's this kind of, for lack of better words, like there's this kind of magic. And I'm just using that term because my diction's not so great. I don't have a great word for it, but I'm going to call it kind of, magic or whatever, enchantment. but I get so fulfilled and deeply satisfied by this process of making. And I think that, you know, the project that I finished, which was that skeleton made of graphite that made its own drawings, like that thing.
I'm going to describe this for people so that you understand, because if you've not seen it, it's going to be hard to jump. But Helio effectively recreated a life-size human skeleton out of graphite. And that graphite human skeleton was presented on a kinetic table. And on that table, he laid out a sheet of paper such that as this graphite skeleton was laying there, the table jiggled and it produced a drawing below. And then the table enabled Helio to create multiple drawings. Is anyone lost here? If you are, it's fine. Raise your hand and we'll try again. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't even understand it, really. Really. Like, I see this thing when it was drawing. I mean, there were nights when I looked at it and I thought, I didn't make this. I didn't invent bones. I didn't, like this thing. It's sort of like when Delia and I, my lovely wife, we had a child, and, you know, I was there, gave birth, and, like, I looked at that child and I go, yeah, I didn't make that child. Like, that, I am a teeny part of this thing. And it felt like that with this skeleton, like you know, this graphite, which comes from living things from millions of years ago. So these were plants and animals from millions of years ago. And it's sort of in my imagination, I imagine like it was, this graphite was exhumed on my behalf so I can make another body for it. So it's really the second body. And then other people tell me, like, well, maybe it's the third or fourth or eighth, you know, who knows? And which is really, you know, a beautiful idea. But so what, for me, like, that kind of, you know, 1 + 1 = 4, 8, to me, that's when it's super exciting, and I feel like man, I really scraped something vital. Like, man, I'm on the edge of something like beautiful. You know, and then I get like, wow, maybe this is kind of what, so words get a little lost here, like, I'm not that, I'm trying to like struggle, but like it's, I feel like I'm onto something that, man, I just get so excited about pursuing it, getting closer and closer and closer to whatever that is. And I've got kind of inklings of what that is, but I feel like I'm getting closer every time I kind of get.
It's almost as though the excitement is in the abstract space where you're not sure where you're going yet. In the experience.
Yeah, because anything that I know of is, what's that? That's like regurgitated stuff, right?
Sure.
Yeah, so this new space is like where life really explodes, really gets exciting and new. I get reborn again, over and over and over again. So.
And Yvonne, Tiersa, do you have, maybe not an equivalent, but something that you're working on, or a time or a point in the creative process where you get that feeling, that joy, that excitement, and you feel like you're on to something? Do you want to start with Tiersa?
I guess most recently, in preparation for the show, I just had at Municipal Bonds, I was exploring some new themes and materials, and it started with a really simple, I inherited a bunch of rocks from my father when he passed away, and all different kinds, really simple ones, and more interesting crystals, and all kinds of things, and I had just been thinking a lot about them, and wondering what he really loved about them, and I started to come to my own conclusions about them, being these like markers of time, and then thinking about how I wanted to play with that, and there's basically a long process of, well, maybe I'll try this thing, like maybe I'll get these water jet cut and make a puzzle together, or maybe I could like do a cast of this thing and then I'll put together in another way, or maybe I'll just paint it. I want to make sort of portraits of these things, and it just it just becomes this like investigative process, or this like adventuring, like just like one thought triggers the next, and that is just the most fun place to be. That's what I most want to do, and it's not something I always have the freedom of time to do. So it's really special, especially when it's about the freedom of, it could be whatever you want, because oftentimes there's a project and a timeline, and there's like a real deliverable, and so to have the freedom to explore through the making of things, through playing with material, and then coming across something like a process of making, and what I landed on, starting that process, one of the pieces I ended up with was really simple, and it was just this like puncturing of paper. It was this like repetitive process that was creating this kind of lava rock-like texture, and then layering that with reflective material, and it started to have these other dimensions and it made me think about celestial imagery, and so I would say it's that whole exploratory process that is the joy.
And the work she's describing was a series of perforated paper works, just so you know.
Yeah, enormous.
I would say that something I'm really excited about right now is my residency. That's happening right up there. I've never had the opportunity to really just explore a bunch of materials. This whole talk is about this idea of being all these different things, and I feel like this is the first time I've got an opportunity to connect the dots between all of those things and make them feel, it's kind of like I get to tell myself, actually everything you have been doing is connected. And it's not disparate, and it's not unthought out and wild and crazy and chaotic. Like, actually there are connections between all the things that you're doing. And honestly, that alone is a gift. And it's amazing to be able to go and just sit down and be like, what do I want to do today? Like, that just doesn't usually happen. And so I'd say that's the thing I'm definitely the most excited about right now. And I'm so excited to fill up that gallery with all the ideas that now I feel like I really have, I know what I'm going to do, and just show this visual language that is apparently my language. Yeah.
I would say so. Thanks for talking a little bit about sort of individual practice, and I want to talk, because all of you are collaborating with multiple people at different points and bouncing off of each other, quite frankly. So when you're not engaged in handcraft directly, when you're not being the lone woodworker, Yvonne, in your studio, and you're not alone sewing and cutting and patterning, and you're not working with your hand tools, chiseling away, what are you looking for in a collaborator, in a partner, in a sounding board, or...
Trust, I would say, would be the main thing.
Unpack that.
So Yvonne is my main collaborator, and I could get pretty emotional about that, but we both went to CCA. I feel like and Helio also went to CCA. We were both, what we realized, I met her and I was like, hey, I want to make some wood jewelry. Okay, and she was like, yeah, I'm game. And then we started working together, and we realized we really spoke the same language, and some of that probably has to do with our schooling and having gone to the same school. But we sort of synced up and realized that we both had that desire to constantly iterate, I think. And so, the trust part is just knowing that someone's going to be authentic and open and honest with you. And so that's unpacking the trust part. I guess it's kind of simple. Just knowing that that person has your back, and when you're doing a collaboration, you have to be really honest with each other and be like, I don't like that. That doesn't work. And you have to be able to have that conversation and not be afraid of it. So Yvonne and I have that, and we are, we have more ideas that we can possibly make, probably, but that's awesome. That's exciting. So I would say I'd be looking for that in a collaboration. That same feeling of like, yeah. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I would say.
Is she fun to play with?
I would say it's definitely, there has to be a shared enthusiasm, and I think what makes collaborations really great is when you're really different. And I think working with Tiersa, she's coming from fashion, textiles, this totally different process and way of thinking and making, and I'm coming from furniture making, woodworking, sculpture, and I think the great thing about collaborating with these people is that the way that ideas end up somewhere where you wouldn't take them on your own. And so being able to have that kind of conversation that springboards, and it just keeps springboarding. And I worked with Tiersa for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years now, and there's so many things that we've developed that haven't come to be their final thing yet, but it's there's so many ideas that are really interesting and exciting, and are pushing each of us beyond like our comfort zone and within our field, and then like coming into each other's as well. And I've worked with graphic designers and videographers and playing with food, and I think that it's the part of the thing that I've already said. It's the exploration and the discovery of something new that is like the most exciting part of making. And when you're working with other people, there's even more opportunity for that.
Do you have something to add to this, or can I make a jump? Do you want to add? Go, no, talk. Jump? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to go a little dark. Hope we're okay with that. There's a lot of invisible labor in the art, craft, and design space. I know as a curator, I'm excited by work that engages concerns, raising awareness and discourse around social issues, inequity when it comes to a number of things, health, wellness, food and foodways, climate change. Are there any concerns that any of you engage directly through your work? Or, given the many problems we're faced with solving, do you feel like it's okay to not engage those concerns? Does anyone want to?
I thought we weren't going to have any tough questions. I think it's like, I think there's we, as people who make things, and we have to use resources, we have to use materials, we might need to use help, I think there's always this trade-off we have to do, right? Like we have to measure like, okay, what kind of good gets put into the world from my activity? And, does that outweigh the kind of negative things that happen? And I hope that in my making, I'm doing my math correctly, and I'm on the plus side of the good part.
1 + 1 = 8.
Well, yeah, see that 8, I think
Right.
it's good, yeah.
Favorable lens.
So, I think I would venture to say, like, each of us probably do a similar kind of math in our heads, but it's not an easy question for sure. It's something I definitely think about, because I put the part of my work, I make these graphite things, and the graphite comes from, like, the best graphite in the world comes from Sri Lanka and Madagascar, which are like it's like the purest, it's crystal graphite. So there's some pieces in the gallery, but you can see they're like silvery metal. And, I don't know a whole lot about how it's mined. And probably, in Madagascar and Sri Lanka, probably, the conditions are probably pretty rough, if I'm to be honest. But use that material because I think it does something that, for me personally, I think it feeds what I'm doing, and I believe that it does something to the people who look at the work and maybe give it as a gift or, I mean, that's what I tell myself, right? That I think that in my heart of hearts, I feel like that I'm still on the plus side of that. That it may balance out and maybe balance out on the positive end of things. You know, I try to do the right things, like the boxes that we make, that are made for us, are made in Oakland. We make all of our things in San Francisco by me and my wife. And we've been doing it for 22 years, so we try to do what we think is the right thing, but it's a very complicated equation. But, you know.
Thank you. Do you want to say something?
Well, I can say that I have a company, Stella Fluorescent, it's co-founded by myself and my husband, and it's a jewelry company, and jewelry, textile jewelry, some accessories, and it was started with the idea of sustainability at its root. I would say I'm having some issues with the word sustainability these days, and all the greenwashing that's going on kind of drives me nuts, but for us what it means is that it's mainly, I'd say, around the materials and also the labor. All of it's been a guiding light as far as the types of materials I choose, where I get them from, and internalizing our costs as opposed to externalizing our costs. So I was recently asked, like, how do you make sustainable jewelry and accessories but keep it easy on the pocketbook? And I was like, I don't. Like, that would be dishonest, it's impossible, especially in this city. So I'm also really interested in the transparency around that. It's a big concern for me, and I'm thinking about it all the time with everything I make and every material I use. Can I speak to it at all?
Yeah. I maybe lost the original question, but fundamentally...
Go with what's on your brain.
Yeah. I think that I had this dialogue with myself all the time about why I'm making things. Because I have to consume, both in the process of making the things to make the things. Like there's actually a lot of waste when I think about it. And then at the end, I'm just like making more things for people. We already have so much, and I think that I don't have an answer to it, but it comes up a lot. I think we are material beings. I really respond to objects. I really care about things, and I think that they hold a lot of significance. They tell stories, and there's so much there. But we are over-consuming, and it's depleting our planet and creating so many problems. And I think that's something that I personally think about. There is work that is exploring those ideas. That's in process.
Can you talk about some of the work? I was going to say, can you talk about some of the work that is solving for some of those challenges? Because I see it in your studio.
Yeah, I think those are things that I'm in the process of uncovering, and I think a lot of that is rooted in the material. I have, and I make things that have offcuts. There's scraps, and there's all the little trash that comes out of it, and a lot of that is still kind of beautiful and still useful. And so the hoarder in me is collecting all these things with the intention of turning that into something. So it's like breaking big parts into smaller parts. I have a wood shop, so most of my material is that, but I think that there are a lot of other materials. Last year, with the help of Lisa, I was working on a proposal to even start to work with plastic, and because there's so much of that we throw away and use one time, and there is actually a functional and useful material, but it requires tooling and processes to reuse it. So it's a more complicated thing. So for me, it's starting with what I actually have in my studio. And that's more of like holding on to things like longer so that I can reprocess it, which is really hard to do because it's really messy in my studio, and it also makes me a little crazy. So Tiersa, you're the only one who hasn't admitted to a little bit of crazy. Can you speak a little bit to your resourcefulness with materials, because it's a fun conversation with you.
Oh, well, there's plenty of crazy. You guys are crazier than me. All the same. Well, I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to, but I do save everything. I save every single tiny scrap of everything, and I organize it, and you can actually see some of that upstairs. I feel like everything actually has a use. Like, I feel like there's like, if you really like tap in to, how do I say this? I feel like every little offcut can actually become something. And I think because a lot of the materials I use are really already so beautiful, like I use a bunch of naturally dyed silk, so even the littlest piece, like, that could become a composite material that can be pressed together and create some kind of other interesting textile. So I have a lot of intense organization going on around all of my straps. So, is that what you're referring to?
Maybe.
A little bit? Okay. All right.
Just leaving.
Do you want to say something?
No, don't look at me. Can you talk a little bit about how you solve problems specifically through your art, through your craft, through your design?
What kind of problems?
I don't know. What kind of problems do you want to talk about? No, in your practice, as you're working, how do you engage your skills to work through something if you are trying something new? What are the ways that you press through as you're making objects? What skills do you tap in the craft space, in the design space, as artists? Is that a clear enough question? Yeah.
So when I'm in my, I'm trying to walk myself back here I'm in my studio, and I finished my last project, let's say, and I'm thinking about what I'm going to do next. And I think what I do is I start moving things around the studio, and I try to focus in on something that's interesting to me, and then I try to test myself whether this thing that I might get a glint of something that there might be something there. I test myself and maybe I ask myself like, is this just a fascination? Or is there something bigger here? Like, is it like a tentacle that gets to something much bigger and, scarier, or if there's something more? And I think that's like, for me, that's the kind of test. Like, if it's just a tentacle that's detached from the octopus or the kraken or whatever, then I go, maybe not that interesting. It's just a tentacle. But if it's connected to something else, if it's connected to the octopus, that's connected to the ocean, that's connected to a landmass, that's connected to back to me and all this other stuff, then I go, oh, this is kind of cool. And like, I'll just take the next step toward that and kind of take that tentacle and say, what happens to this tentacle if I take it out of the water? What happens if I put it in a different kind of water? And then just start this process of figuring out, like learning everything I need to know about this tentacle. Like almost obsessively, like...
Repetition of practice, in a way.
What do you mean, like repetition?
Well, repetition of something, or continuing to work on something repeatedly until you either get somewhere.
It's like understanding the world, like feeling like, there's so much we inherit, like much of our knowledge is inherited, right? Like we've read so much about what the world is, but what do we really know about the things and how it feels and how it smells and like direct contact with the stuff, with you and just the stuff. Like that's a really tiny little experience, really. So I'm really interested in like, let me dive deep into my real relationship with whatever it is, not this stuff that I've learned. I mean, that learned stuff is good because it can tell you if you're crazy or not. But I think the real stuff is when I get to know for sure I'm experiencing this. This is what's happening to me right at this moment, and this is worthy of my exploring deeper. Wow, this is exciting. It's, there's not a lot of, I don't have specific words for it, but I know it in a kind of maybe intuitive way that it's worthy of my exploration and getting deeper, to give it more form, to put it in other contexts so I can see it more clearly. Like that to me is when I know I need to go down the road.
You asked about problem solving, I think,
Yeah,
and
problem
I think
solving.
that what Helio was getting at is like, in a way, it's like one of the kinds of problem solving. Like you're like, it's the uncovering of the what, kind of. It's like you're creating your own problem, like through your interest in whatever it is, and then you solve what it is and how, I think. But then in the making of that, there are other maybe technical things that come up about like how something like is going to stand or hang on the wall or something like that. And
you need your craft,
yeah,
your design part of it.
yeah. And so then sometimes you have to like do technical drawings and like do tests of things put together in different ways to find a solution that gets to what it is you're going after. And sometimes you don't know exactly what it is, and that's why you have to try it. And sometimes you do know exactly what it is, and you just have to like figure out how to actually create the jig to make that cut.
And that's where like the craft design part of us, I think, is fun and smart, because then we can draw upon it. We don't have to get on the phone and get some technical experts to say, hey, how do you do this? We're open to that craft part, the design part.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what you were saying earlier. That's our real advantage of being craftspeople, is like we can solve it eventually.
Do you get excited about emerging technologies and tools? I know, Tiersa, you quoted Erykah Badu, I'm an analog girl in a digital world, but do emerging technologies and tools excite you in your practice?
Well, I don't know. Some, but to be honest, not a ton. Like that's not really, maybe eventually. Yeah, I am an analog girl. That's very true. So that's a simple answer to that question. As far as the problem solving, what she was touching on, I have always felt really grateful that I do have this sense as a person, a craftsperson, that I can kind of figure out how to make most anything. I can watch a YouTube tutorial. I mean, there's things, someone was just asking me today, how do you make these bracelets? And how did you learn how to do this kumihimo? I'm like, YouTube?
Can you describe kumihimo?
Oh, kumihimo is a circular braid made on a circular loop, and there's a bunch of different ways that you can make it. It's a hollow braid. But I always had this sense that I can figure out how to make anything if I just keep doing many versions of it. And I also have a lot of patience around tedious techniques, which I think is really helpful as a craftsperson. I always tell my students who are having a hard time making a garment, I'm like, you should hand sew it. You should baste it first. Use your hands to do it. That's like, for sure, when you set in that sleeve, it's going to be right if you take the time to hand sew it first. So I'm really about like the nuts and bolts of taking the time to do it by hand, to do it slowly, that's a big thing for me. Yeah. Can I speak to that again?
Well, I think part of what you're touching on is the persistence. You just gotta keep going until you figure out. And I think the other thing that's really important, and that I realized a lot over the last 2 years where we were like really separated, is that I talk to a lot of people. Like there are other makers who have different amounts of experience, and like this is a problem I run into. What would you do? And it's both technical and even just looking at the thing. Like, what do you think about this? You know, and I think that that's a really important part of having. It's a really important part of my creative practice. I mean, it's why it's really great to have like regular collaborators that I can bring into whatever it is I'm exploring.
Do you want to add anything else? Otherwise, we're almost out of time. So, I know, crazy. That happened. Is there anything else that you want to add right now? Anyone on the panel? Otherwise, I'm going to open it up.
Oh, I want to say something.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to say this.
Now.
There's a second part of this residency that I'm super excited about. It's Laura Elaine Ellis. She is a dancer and a choreographer, and she's going to be having a residency in April. Starting in April. And I'm going to be collaborating with her. What's kind of interesting is that I'm looking at line in sort of a formal analysis, but her work is looking at lineage, and I've already started working with her dancers around looking at the concept of line as opposed to the formal aspect of line. So we've been looking at everything from liturgical dancing in pews, the lines that creates, slave trade, what else? Redlining. So it's kind of cool because what I'm doing is sort of formal, definitely formal. What she's doing is conceptual, and so I feel like we're really addressing every way that you can think about lines. So I'm super excited for the second part of this residency.
When does that start?
April?
And there will be a performance of her piece that she's working on with Tiersa the first weekend in May.
Yeah, first weekend in May, and it'll be in the space.
In the atrium, yeah.
And then there will be some community engagement as well. And it will go for 2 months.
It will likely be April and then culminate with the performance in May. Yeah.
So I just wanted to.
Does anyone in the audience have any questions for these 3 minus 1? No pressure. I know.
I have a question.
Okay.
I'm curious because, well,
Do you need a mic?
that's okay. I'll try to speak loud. I'm curious when something becomes a series or a multiple, because I feel like that's one thing that sort of work in is that one idea becomes you sort of zero in on one idea and then you sort of expand and then you kind of repeat it and then all of a sudden it's something that is a multiple. How do you decide that specific work is the one that should be a multiple versus something else? How does that decision happen?
Can you in the back hear that question, or do you want me to repeat it? You good? Okay. Does anyone want to speak to multiples?
Are you asking about like a series of objects, or like a limited edition thing, or like an idea that you just want to keep going?
I guess just it does, whether it's a limited edition or a series of objects, like how do you sort of zero in on an idea that then you sort of like develop and try to run with versus another idea? Like what is
Like a one-off versus something that you're going to make many of?
I mean, it's a good question. I feel like it's just, it starts as being intuitive, and you just want to do it again. And maybe the ability to do multiples. I think that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, this is sort of the beauty of being a multi-hyphenate sort of person, is you can, if you like the graphite things that I make, which are like objects that are sold in like museum shops, and I mean, like, are you talking about like a kind of an object, like a product, or are you talking about editions, like numbered editions?
Oh, I was thinking about product. I was thinking
Oh,
about
product.
I was thinking about something that kind of goes out into the
Yeah,
world.
like, I mean, you know, I make those things and I make them over and over and over again. And they're made in a special mold, and, you know, the process is, it just makes sense, like the molds cost so much to make that you gotta make more of them. And so I have no problems being kind of, you know, if you wanna call it designer or, you know, craftsperson, you know, I make, you know, we make these things that are made, can be made in multiples and to be shared or bought by people at a very reasonable price. I mean, I think it was, but and then it can be shared. It's almost a kind of, you know, democracy. Like I also sell, you know, paintings and sculpture, which are, you know, one of a kind and take a bit more money. But like what is it? A friend of mine was saying, yeah, it's cool that everyone gets to vote. Like, it's not one collector who spends, you know, a bunch of money to get one thing, but everybody gets to. It's accessible. So
Yeah, I mean, I would say just in my own experience, making multiples and working with artists on editions, as well as working with contemporary artists and designers on one-of-a-kind objects, perhaps as part of a family of objects or a series of objects that go together or are complementary in some way. It often comes down to pragmatic concerns and context. But I love the idea of additions and multiples as making a strong conceptual idea more accessible to more people. And oftentimes it's pragmatic to make it accessible to more people. Because the cost of R&D and development and materials and fabrication setup fees and flops and iteration along the way is so costly that if you don't produce multiples, you're eating it. Or if you don't produce something as a one-of-a-kind object at a very high price, you're losing money, but rather maybe gaining experience along the way. But often it comes down to pragmatic concerns and then ideology around accessibility, right? That's just me.
Anyone else have anything to ask? Yeah.
Where's your skeleton now, Elio?
Where's the skeleton now?
oh, the skeleton is the skeleton is in my studio, in a box. Like a crypt. It was traveling around for a little while, and then, you know, COVID hit, and so the tour had ended. But it had a really kind of a funny stint at this winery in Napa, the Prisoner Winery.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Do you know this?
I know the wine, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like this really luxy kind of cavernous space in Napa. If you ever go there, it's really. It's
I haven't been.
Oh, it's
I
a
just
really
know
cool place to go, because it's unlike anything in Napa. So it's not the pastoral sort of place. It's like dark, it's cavernous, it's like, it feels like New York. So I was there for a while, and then you know, it was gonna go to Houston, and then everything was shut down. So I'm hoping to get it into a church. Like, I think that would be like the perfect place for it, because like a Buddhist temple. That would be perfect, because I think it touches on ideas of samsara, the idea of, you know, the life or birth and death. It's kind of this like trying to scoop birth and death. I'm all about that. Anytime I can scoop birth and death, I'm cool.
In the back, in the red.
Oh, is the winery that was up the one that has the name of
It's Orin Swift.
the Devil's Barn or something like that?
I didn't catch that. Did you hear it?
Devil's Barn?
No, the name of the winery was Prisoner Winery. It's over Yeah, but no longer there. It's now in a small box in my studio.
Yeah, in the back? Hi.
Hi. How do each of you stay connected to that sense of wonder when you're making work that is super repetitive, something that you might be selling in a store? Like, how does that manifest?
I don't think, we can't hear
Stay
you.
connected to that sense of wonder, even when you get repetitive work.
Thank you for your ears. Thank you. Okay, telephone,
Can
go.
you repeat the question?
Do you want to repeat the question?
How do you keep that state of wonder when you're doing repetitive work all the time? How do you keep that? Yeah.
How do you maintain a sense of wonder when you're doing repetitive work or something that you've produced many times over?
Well, I don't think I would look to that repetitive work for wonder. But I do think one thing about repetitive work is that it's an opportunity to practice mindfulness. And I feel like either you could be doing something you're super excited about and that's new, but when you're doing the repetitive work, which I do a ton of because I make commodities, and I do pretty much all the production, I feel like there is a place that you can get into where you can really get to practice mindfulness, which is, it's not wonder exactly, but it is a special place to be. And I feel like repetitive work, knitting, embroidering, that all lends itself to, gives you an opportunity to slow down and get out of your head.
Yeah, I would agree. Or there is this space when you are doing something where you're totally lost in it, where you're in the zone, and that's, I think, where you both become mindful and also it's kind of blissful. And maybe there's wonder in that, but I think the other thing is, there are so many repetitive tasks in my work, and just standing for days. And so I wear earbuds and listen to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks and music. And I think that is one of the real amazing things about my work is that, or my job, I'm making things, but at the same time I'm able to consume other creative content that I'll stop and take notes, and it triggers all these other layers of inspiration. So that's one of them.
My dad exercises while brushing his teeth. I don't know if that's wonder, but it's related to what you just said.
I had a teacher who said there's kind of wonder everywhere. It's everywhere. And it's about paying attention to it, or giving it room to show you the wonder. It's kind of right here. It's kind of in everything. I think when I'm working on something that's repetitive, and I kind of know it's repetitive, there's always this thing, you find this new little, if I'm carving down a piece of graphite, there's I think it could be a little shinier. Oh, that's too shiny. I should cut that shine just a little bit. I think I'm gonna. So I think it's in the minutia of things after you get to after working to a certain point, and there's a certain rhythm in your work, and then it starts becoming little teeny bits, I think, that bring this kind of satisfaction to you to bring that little wonder back. So I think it's this microscope. I might be working in a sort of a big telescope when I first start, and that's really satisfying. And then after I start repeating, then I look down closer and closer, and I find these little things to concern myself with, and I go, oh man, if I can smooth that little teeny little spot out, I'll be so satisfied. I'll go for that. So I think it's wherever. I think it's kind of wherever you look. It's just a matter of bringing all of your attention to it, and then that becomes really satisfying.
I think we can end on that. So thank you for the question and yours and helping us with it. And thanks for everyone coming out tonight on a Saturday. These three all have work at SFArtsED upstairs, and I believe it's open after this talk, so I'd encourage you all. We've been talking about objects that everyone makes here, but it's another thing to see them right in front of your own eyes and hold them. So I'd encourage everybody to come up. Thank you again to SFArtsED and to Minnesota Street Project. Pete, thank you for setting us up today, and we hope to see you all again soon.